I spent a year grinding my face off at my job, trying to make as much money as humanly possible, thinking that it was going to make me more confident, it was going to fix my low self-worth, it was going to make me believe in myself more, make me love myself more, all of that stuff. I spent a year trying to accomplish this. I got to the end of the year. I opened up my final pay stub. I had made the most money I'd ever made in my entire life and realized I was still miserable.
Welcome to the show, Kevin. It's great to have you here.
I appreciate you having me, my friend. I'm excited to chat and see where we end up with our conversation.
Yeah, so the first thing I'm curious about is, how did your business start? Did it start as a podcast, or did it start as coaching or courses? And then which parts evolved around that core offering?
Yeah, it started as a podcast, and it got to the point where we were spending money to live and spending money to exist and spending money on the podcast. And we got to a point where we realized if we're not making money, this really isn't going to be a sustainable mission that we're on. So I ended up starting coaching for free. I started doing mindset coaching and peak performance coaching for free. And then that kind of led us down the path of, oh, okay, one of the better ways for us to make money and turn this into a business actually is going to be through coaching, products and services. Really, how do we add more value to our audience based on what we're talking about on the podcast? And then from there, a lot of things kind of happened, and it grew as a business as a result of that.
Nice. Yeah, that sounds like a good way to go about it. I started this podcast about a year and a half ago now. And after like the 5th episode, I realized, okay, this is by far the most fulfilling thing I've ever done.
Love it.
So I just want to keep doing it forever.
Yeah, I always liken it to, I think a lot of people find something that's really profitable in life, and then they try to convince themselves that they're passionate about it. And I'm guilty of that many times over. With the podcast, very similar to you by the sounds of it, I found something that was so fulfilling and something that I was so passionate about and I felt like there was purpose in, where I imagine if I could make money and turn this into a business and I could do this every day, I would be the most fulfilled person in the world and life would be incredible. It's hard and there's challenges in growing any business, right? But the fact that I get to podcast every day literally was a dream for me at one point. So yeah, I resonate with that a lot.
Awesome. So when you look at young entrepreneurs today, what are the main mistakes you see that they're making that you think they could avoid if they just learned a few fundamental lessons?
I feel like a lot of young entrepreneurs are, and please do not villainize me if you're a young entrepreneur listening to this, I feel like at times they're becoming a little bit entitled because they're listening to content that says, look, this is how you go viral, and this is how you build your business overnight, and this is how you make $10,000 offers, and blah, 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 blah. And in the beginning, you really have to understand that it's your job as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, especially in the early days, to build demand. That's really what you're trying to do. I trust that you have a valuable supply. I trust that your podcast is great, or your coffee shop is great, or your digital marketing service is great. I trust that. I believe in you. But until we build demand, it doesn't really matter. So in the very beginning, that's your job as an entrepreneur or a business owner. It's to build demand and to get people through the doors. And I think that's something that just understanding that early on is super, super important. That's one. Two, your business is really only going to grow to the level that you've grown to internally. Self-improvement, working on yourself, professional development, personal development, that's really going to dictate a lot of the success that you have in your business because your business is not going to grow more than you do. And then I would say last thing is it's most likely going to be harder than you think. It's most likely going to be harder and it's going to take more commitment and more consistency and longer than you probably think. We didn't make money for the first couple years. I thought it was going to happen a lot sooner than that. I'm grateful now looking back it didn't because I learned a lot of lessons. But I was under a very similar mindset. I thought, yeah, we'll start a business, we'll start a podcast, and people will start reaching out, offering me money. And that just was not the way it worked. So I think those are a few tweaks and mindset shifts that might help.
Right. So improve yourself so that your business can grow. Because I have seen a lot of self-limiting beliefs in the entrepreneurship space, which then limit people's potential to grow their business. where
Yep.
they start thinking that they can't charge a price beyond a certain amount. But that's just a misconception, right? Or they begin to imagine all of these barriers that don't really exist, right, to growing their business and so on. And then
Yep.
those become real because they believe them. So I think that's great advice. Yeah.
I appreciate it.
So once someone has started their business and let's say they're trying to generate demand, what do you view as the important things to understand about sales, marketing, lead generation?
Man, sales is way more than just exchanging something for money. The sales process is a whole thing. A lot of people think of sales as you're on the call with someone and you're about to talk about terms and money and deliverables and whatever it is. Sales starts long before that when you start building a relationship with someone. So if you focus on the relationship for long enough, it makes sales a lot easier. Just focus on the relationship and focus on adding value. If you add value to someone for long enough, their next logical step will be to work with you instead of somebody else. Another thing I always talk about this when it comes to sales. I would rather somebody not work with me and be happy about it than work with me and be disappointed. It's not just about sales. It's about making sure it's a win-win-win-win-win-win and just doing what's best for the customer or the client. So that's a couple thoughts I have on sales. I think sales is a very misconstrued thing because again, social media makes it seem like you just do this, but there's a process that goes into that. The marketing side of things, I think that people don't always understand that one of the things about marketing is it gets your name out there and it helps people identify who you are and what you do and builds a relationship. But marketing doesn't always equate to conversion. Just because you have a really good piece of social media content or a really good ad or whatever it is, it doesn't mean that's going to be the end all be all. And marketing is way more than just like social media. It's your packaging, it's your messaging, it's your words, it's your emotions that your brand conveys. So there's way more that goes into marketing than just, oh, I'm going to do some social media marketing today. It's way more well-rounded than I think a lot of people really get into. What was the last one? Sales, marketing, and what?
Lead generation.
Lead generation. Yeah, that's a really hard one. In the beginning, the thing that I've realized, and I've worked with a lot of entrepreneurs in the beginning, is your lead generation in the beginning is most likely going to be very unscalable, and it's probably going to take up a lot of your time. So let's use this as an example. Going on a podcast is a potential opportunity for lead generation because however many people listen to the episode might say, oh, interesting, Kev's cool, I want to work with Kev, right, hypothetically. But it requires an hour of my time. I can't do anything else while I'm doing it. And I can really only do 12 of these a day. So I find that when it comes to lead gen, in the very beginning, usually the most valuable way to build lead gen is also the least scalable way. And it's going to take hours of your time in exchange for the opportunity to get some eyes. That's something I've noticed that works really, really well in the beginning. Awesome. It gets to the place where you don't have the time to do that anymore. Great. But in the beginning, you have a lot of time and you usually have very little capital and very little demand. So let's use that time to try to go out and get leads and get in front of people.
Makes sense. Yeah, there's this great essay by Paul Graham. He founded Y Combinator. He invests in startups and writes about it. He talks about do things that don't scale. And he tells the story of the Airbnb founders who for a very long time would go door to door with a laptop and they would show people their software one-on-one, and even when they were worth millions of dollars, they did this. And it's kind of seems silly, but one of the founders actually said when he could no longer do it, when he was too busy, he kind of missed it because the one-on-one data from the customer was just so irreplaceable.
That's
so there
really
will come
good,
a point.
Yeah, that's a really good story. I literally just before this, I got off a podcast breakthrough session. So I help podcasters grow and all that stuff. And I have done 400 of those. It's free. Many of them, there's no money ever exchanged for it. I love it. I get to understand what people are going through. I have one-on-one conversations and people say, this is what I'm struggling with. And then it helps me understand what people are struggling with. So market research too. That's another way to get really good at market research. I think that's a great story.
Yeah, absolutely. So there will come a day when you're too busy to be on these podcasts, but then you'll kind of miss it, and then you'll be in another phase. And I think it's the same thing as parenting, right? Where people say, be present with your child now, because in a blink of an eye, they'll be in a different phase of their growth, and you'll miss whatever you might now view as annoying or difficult to deal with. So it's kind of like appreciate every phase you're in because it will pass.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean you're doing bad if you're in that phase. It doesn't mean, well, I'm doing a bunch of unscalable stuff. I'm trading my time for money. I mean, there's going to be phases where you do that. That's okay. I think that's just par for the course.
Yeah, there's this idea I love about sort of taking advantage of the unique factors about wherever you are. So if you're a small business rather than a big one, then you can tell people, then you can actually like take the time to write a handwritten card for every customer who buys, right? Now, a big business can't afford to do that, but you can. And you can tell clients, a big business might put you in their CRM software and get in touch with you every so often, but they're just following process. For me, you will be top of mind because I only have so many clients. I'm a small business. I can genuinely focus on you. And if you're a big business, you can say, well, I have processes because they work, so I can deliver results, right? And so either way, you can play to your advantage.
That's a great perspective. I like that a lot. I talk about that all the time. I love the unscalability because I think it's a differentiator. One of the things I try to do, and again, it's harder as you get busier, but anytime I ever got a follower on Instagram, I would send them a video. And I would just jump on and say, hey, Bob, thank you so much for the follow. I appreciate it, my friend. Genuinely, please let me know if there's anything I can do to support you. And I got so many wonderful messages back, and a lot of people said, nobody's ever sent me a video. I know, it's a pain in the butt. It's a pain in the butt for me to say, oh, this person, all right, what's their name? Oh, they don't have their name on their profile. How do I find their name? I got to find their name, and then I'm recording a video and then sending it over. Extremely unscalable, but very personal. And I think if your brand has personality, if that's a piece of it, I think being personal is always going to be some layer of valuable. So I resonate a ton with that.
Actually, I think that's very smart because the internet has a way of anonymizing and kind of dehumanizing us. It takes away our personality and individuality, where I think sending a one-on-one video where you're thanking them by name really does the opposite, right? It humanizes them. It makes them feel like a person. And then they'll value you and view you as a person rather than just a social media page they follow. And they'll remember you for a much longer time.
That's the goal. That's the goal, is to actually impact someone. That's impact. They're going to look at you differently in some way, shape, or form. I'm sure I've sent videos to people and they probably thought I was weird. Why is this guy sending me a video? I'm sure that's happened. But that's still a layer of impact, I guess, maybe just not the intended one.
Yeah. So what is the long-term vision for your business?
Man, we have a lot of data on humans, not necessarily in the ways of other like tech companies where they're tracking everything that you do, but we have a lot of good data on human behavior. So all of our clients track habits, all of our team members track habits. Alan, my business partner, and I, we track habits. So we have a lot of data on habits and how humans work with habits and limiting beliefs and empowering beliefs and all that stuff. So in the long, long run, our goal is to create some level of an app that helps people with their habits, habit tracking, book recommendations, ultimately a very scalable coach in your pocket is really what we're thinking in the long, long, long run. And then that's like the business side. And then we also have a social media company. We have a podcast production company, one-on-one coaching, group coaching. We have live events. We have all that stuff that we're going to continue to grow and scale. And then the podcast, really, that's something we're never going to stop. So that's really a big brand builder for us. So it's really that. It's really continue to do an episode every day for the podcast, keep growing the podcast, get a little bit better every day, continue doing the products and services that are client-facing and one-to-many, but really one-to-one, but one-to-many, and then create some sort of technology and an app where it's one-to-scale through all the stuff that we've collected over the last 7 years, habits, behaviors, that type of stuff, yeah.
That's interesting. Did you see Tony Robbins and Dean Graziosi? They they built this AI that was trained on all of their own writing and speeches and talks and seminars. And so the AI was kind of like a personal access to the mind of Tony Robbins and team.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a big thing. They're pushing that out. I had a client who was going to do that. I had a client who was, I don't know if it was the same program, but yeah, it's ultimately all of the content they take, and then you can ask them a question. It's like, what do I do if I have a limiting belief? And then they just go through the Rolodex, boom, there you go. Yeah, very interesting. The world is becoming a very weird place, my friend.
Yeah, so that means that in the future, people could have like a Kevin and Alan coach in their pocket.
100%.
It knows everything you would say anyway. It's been trained on all these coaching sessions.
Yeah.
And then it can provide that insight. And yeah, it's amazing that this gives us scalability. You don't have to be there one-on-one trading your time for results.
Yeah. And the ultimate thought is like, okay, how do we incorporate all the book recommendations we would have? All right, how do we incorporate all the other stuff that's outside of the stuff that we've specifically said? If we can get it to that degree, you want to talk about impact, there's a lot of impact there for sure.
Yeah, and it's great because it could then, like the client might ask, well, could you summarize this book for me from the list of book recommendations? And it'll do that. And then they can go like, okay, now I'm interested. I want to read that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool. So what's the hardest problem you've run into when building your business, and how did you solve it?
Ooh, great question. Man, I would say building demand was the hardest part. Podcasting is, I mean, it's challenging, right? But really, you're sitting down in front of a microphone having a conversation. All things considered, that's kind of the easiest part of building a business through a podcast. And most people don't quit because they hate the podcasting part. Most people love the podcasting part, but they can't figure out how to make money at the end of it. So it was really understanding that, yeah, having the podcast is great. And it's really great for marketing and branding and building a relationship and adding value-driven lead gen. But after that, you have to have products and services or you're not going to make any money. And you have to figure out, okay, well, you might have 15,000 listens this month. How do we figure out who those people are? If we want to build a community and we want to know these people, we have to figure out where they are. So it was really taking that thought and then saying, all right, well, instead of talking about our products and services, we have to figure out where is a place that our audience would actually want to go to. And then that became like a Facebook group. So it really was figuring out who was actually listening to the podcast and getting the audience to self-identify. I would say that was probably the hardest thing. How do we get people to self-identify as listeners so then we can add more value to their lives and at least we know who they are? And how do we solve that? By having many different layers to the business that were based on the relationship we had with the audience member at that point. So on the podcast for a long time, we never talked about products or services. It was, if you listen to this podcast and you find value in it, we have a Facebook group. So come join the Facebook group. The probability that somebody joins the Facebook group is much higher than the probability of somebody giving me money. So that's how we solved that problem. We just figured out, well, on the podcast, our relationship with someone is a relationship that's growing. They're probably not going to reach out cold for a coaching call. It's probably not going to happen. So why don't we point them to somewhere where the barrier to entry is a little bit lower, where we can continue to add value, and then maybe they decide, you know what, I want to move down to the next layer of the business model. So just layering the business based on the relationship with the end user instead of everything we do is a path directly to money. That's really how we focused on getting people to self-identify.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, lower the barrier to entry to then build a relationship with them even further. And then they can potentially reach out, or you can reach out, if you think coaching would be a good fit or add value for them. That makes sense. Cool. What was the inspiration for the podcast in the first place?
I was somebody who I fell into the rut of thinking that money would solve all of my problems. Money does solve some problems, that is, especially if they're financial, but it's not going to solve all the problems. I didn't know that. So I spent a year grinding my face off at my job, trying to make as much money as humanly possible, thinking that it was going to make me more confident, it was going to fix my low self-worth, it was going to make me believe in myself more. It made me love myself more, all of that stuff. I spent a year trying to accomplish this. I got to the end of the year. I opened up my final pay stub. I had made the most money I'd ever made in my entire life and realized I was still miserable. And I remember thinking to myself, for most of my life, and especially this year, I have lived unconsciously. I don't know why I'm doing what I'm doing. I'm just going through the motions and just hoping I land somewhere. The opposite of unconscious is hyperconscious. So in 2017, I started a podcast called the Hyperconscious Podcast. And that was the beginning. I didn't have any idea it was going to turn into a business. I didn't want to be an entrepreneur. I had no plans of any of that. I started because I wanted to have deep conversations with people. That was it in the beginning. I wanted to talk about self-awareness and weird stuff. I ended up having a really tough mental health year the next year, and I ended up sitting on the edge of a bed contemplating suicide. And a few months after that, I left my job, and then my business partner Alan and I went all in on this, and we both didn't have jobs, and this became the mission. So yeah, the ultimate goal is for us to be the people that we needed when we were really struggling, and that's why we're always going to be a self-improvement company first. Everything else we do helps, and it's monetized, and it helps the business grow, but that's really who we are. Humans are very, very passionate about self-improvement and helping people become more self-aware.
Yeah, I think that's really the way to go, because it's hard to derive happiness from anything external, is what I've learned, right? It has to come from within, which means that you have to be self-aware. You have to build self-awareness. And I think it's a skill. A lot of people think of it like you're either self-aware or not, but you can build it. You can learn. You can introspect.
100%. If anything, I am an example of that. I was not self-aware at all. 7 years. I was not born with self-awareness. I didn't have it, and I worked very hard to try to learn more about myself, because if you don't know that much about yourself, it's really hard to influence the stuff. It's really hard to facilitate change. It's the reason we bring our cars to the mechanic, if we do, is because we're not aware of how to fix them. That's kind of the human condition. If you're not aware of why you're thinking the way you're thinking, it's really hard to change that thought pattern. And like you were talking about in the beginning, there's a lot of limiting beliefs and a lot of mental stuff that's holding people back. And if you're not aware of where it's coming to, it's really hard to shift. So it might sound like something that's, well, that doesn't matter for business, or it doesn't matter for relationships. If you're involved in it, it matters for everything. It's a very important component.
Absolutely. So looking forward, what are the challenges that you foresee the next generation's facing?
Ooh. I don't know how eloquently I can speak on it, because I haven't done a ton of research, and I don't know that much. But AI is going to make many things easier, but it's also going to make many, many, many things harder. A lot of the low barrier to entry, get your foot in the door type things are going to go away. There's the video editing is getting wonky. Like, there's apps that can do it. Audio editing, there's apps that can do it. The AI thing is really going to dictate a lot for the next generation of entrepreneurs, I believe. I think that's going to be a really big thing. Obviously, social media has changed it a ton. I would say the biggest thing is the more access we have to quick fixes and technology, I think for a lot of people, the harder it's going to be to stay consistent and do something for the long run. With opportunity comes distraction. Social media is a great example. A lot of opportunity with social media, right? Where this is technically social media in a way. You and I wouldn't be having a conversation if it wasn't for that aspect to a degree. But there's also a lot of ways to get distracted with the opportunities that we have. So I think staying focused is going to be one of the biggest barriers for people moving forward, because it's really easy not to be. And every app is designed to keep your attention. Everything is. Every YouTube video is designed to keep your attention. Every podcast episode is designed to keep your attention. And you can only put your attention in one place at one time. It's either going to be consuming or creating. So I think it's going to be very telling over the next few years who's really serious about creating and who's unfortunately falling victim to just overconsumption.
Yeah, it's interesting because money is a resource that can scale without limit, but attention is not. So moving from a money economy to a attention consumer economy will have a big impact for a lot of people because we all have the same attention basically to allocate.
Yeah, yeah, and it's now like even the platforms. Attention is a very big piece of currency. Just because you're not spending money on TikTok does not mean you're not increasing the TikTok economy by putting your time there, right? So it really is. Somebody on the other end of that might be making money. That could be you if you had the same strategy they did. But that's just it goes to the creator and consumer within us all.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know if you've heard of this, but there are already like Instagram influencers and models on social media who are getting brand deals who are completely AI generated.
I have seen that. It is weird. I don't know what to make of it. I don't really get it yet, but it's gonna keep trending that way for sure, right? It's you can edit your pictures, you can edit your videos now, you can Photoshop your videos, like things. I think it's gonna be really hard to tell what's real and what's not over the next definitely few years, but few decades. And then you see like the fake advertisements, like the Joe Rogan fake advertisements, where somebody will take his voice and say, "Yes, I've been using X product for 3 years, and it's amazing," and it's not a real ad. So that's something that's going to continue as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then at a certain point, people will have to make a decision like, do I continue to interview real people or do I just interview AI Elon Musk, and Joe Rogan and so on? And I think that will be a challenging decision to make because there's pros and cons to both sides. But I have a feeling the more AI propagates, the more of a resurgence, a counter movement there will be for human content. Because there's something unique about human content, the story, the emotion, the reality to it.
You and I are on very similar pages when it comes to a lot. I feel the same. I think we're excited and chat GPT and this and this and this. And it's like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. It can create my content. It can write my newsletter. It can write my blog. It can make my content. Awesome. Eventually people are going to get sick of that. Everybody knows now when you see delve, when you see the word delve in something, it most likely came from ChatGPT. It loves using that word. So now it's kind of like a running joke. And trust me, I've had that in my content for sure. But I think eventually people are going to be searching for the human. Is AI Elon going to cry? I don't know. But I think people like emotion. I think people like humanization. They like feeling. And I think if we lose sight of that, I agree. I think there's going to be a kickback, and there'll always be a place for it. AI, there'll always be a place for AI. But there are some things that I think humans will most likely always do better because it's more human.
Absolutely. So taking a step back, um, earlier on in life, we learn from our parents, from the people we observe around us, and we take on certain financial, economic, and political beliefs. And these beliefs, for the most part, don't get questioned, sometimes ever, but generally until adulthood. And then they kind of shape the jobs we look for, the companies we work for, the endeavors we partake in, how we invest, consume, save, and so on. So, what do you think are some of the healthiest beliefs that we can build early on? And then also, what do you think are some of the most common unhealthy beliefs that we should be unlearning?
Some of the most unhealthy ones I think are just around money mindset. If so, I was raised broke, not a lot of money, a lot of scarcity. How are we going to pay rent? That developed in me. The second you get money, you better spend it. Because if you don't spend it, it might go somewhere else and you might not have it to spend. That was a very negative pattern I had for a long time. But there's also the other end of that coin where if somebody was raised with a ton of money, they might be entitled and they might think, well, money grows on trees and I deserve all of this stuff. And that's not really a productive, constructive money mindset either. So I think that's a really dangerous one because to your point, many of us are not taught about money. So the money mindset we have is the money mindset we grow up with and we live with and we build a family with and we build a life with. And it can be very, very, very dangerous to have that. I think that's a very, very challenging one. I think one of the most empowering beliefs is you are not stuck. The way you think, the way you act, the way you show up is all very high potential of change. You can change almost anything about yourself. Now, are you going to make yourself taller? Most likely not. I wish, right? That's something I wanted for a long time. But you can definitely make yourself more intelligent. You can make yourself a better speaker. You can make yourself a better parent. You can make yourself a better business owner, a better anything, employee, employer, whatever. We are not stuck as humans. There is a lot of opportunity to grow. And that mindset alone, that belief alone, can shift your entire life. Going back to limiting beliefs, if you think the way you are today is the way you must be forever, you're probably not going to be able to create a desirable future. But if you believe, well, there are pieces of me that maybe I can't really change, but there's a lot about me that I can, let me go dive into books. Let me find mentors. Let me find coaches. Let me find education. Your life can look drastically different. So that's a big piece. I think one of the other empowering ones is just understanding, having an accurate time perspective. When you're young, it's really hard to imagine what life is going to be like 20 years down the line. But statistically, life is a long endeavor for most humans. I mean, it's a pretty long endeavor. And a lot of us don't set ourselves up for the future. We just live in the moment. And I was definitely guilty of that too. So I think an empowering thing is, it's okay for me not to look successful right now because I'm building for the future. And a disempowering one is, I have to look a certain level of successful for people to want to hang out with me or be friends with me or whatever, when in reality, that's really hurting you for the next decade or so. So that's another one I'd add.
Yeah, and ironically, the people who you attract when you look wealthy or you invest in status are not the people you want to be around long term. And the people you want to be around long term who are actually successful will actually respect that you're driving a Toyota Camry and you're clearly saving and investing and working hard, because they know that those things lead to success.
Yeah, it's set up weird. Everything is set up very strange, where you look like you're losing until you win, or you look like you're winning until you lose. It's this weird way it's set up, and that was very well said.
Yeah, I saw this. Yeah, I saw this funny post from Lil Nas X, rapper. He multimillionaire, right? And he posted of himself flying economy on a jet, like flying regular, and he got a bunch of criticism. And he said, "I see you guys all yelling at me, but if I fly private, I don't want to see you complaining I'm hurting the environment, right?" But he knows he's going to get criticism either way, so he'll just do whatever he thinks is right, ultimately, which I think is the way to go.
Yeah. Well, it's tough. That's the other thing too, is it's really hard. You're gonna get kind of judged based on anything you do. Either you're doing too much or you're not doing enough. Either you're doing it in the right way or you're doing it in the right. It's really hard. There could be 51% of people that love you, and there might be 49% of people that just disagree with you, and you're going to get pushback from both ends. But to your point, it's up to you. You have to figure out what matters most to you. What is most aligned for you? Why are you doing what you're doing?
Absolutely. I think when you're aligned with your vision and purpose, then what everyone else thinks kind of falls apart. And then the reality is they just won't be there in 5 or 10 years, realistically. Yes. You'll still be there. You're the only one who has to be there the whole time.
Yes. And you're the one who lives your life. It's up to you to have that moment before you go to bed, when you put your head on the pillow and you say, I did all I could with all I had today, and I was in alignment. I did what was best for me. I showed up as the best version of myself. But nobody else ever sees that, right? That's why it's so hard. And there's a lot of people, unfortunately, out there that look like they're winning, but when they put their head down at the end of the night, they're not happy. They're not fulfilled. They're not proud. And on the opposite end, there's a lot of people who look like they're losing, but when they put their head down on that pillow at the end of the night, they are proud, they are aligned, they are fulfilled. You just would never know it. And that will continue to show through as they continue doing it.
Yeah, I was listening to a fascinating podcast yesterday on the Diary of a CEO with Wim Hof, the Iceman. Mm-hmm. And he talked about how he spent like 8 years when he was quite young, 19 to 27, basically being homeless, being a squatter. And he said those were some of the happiest years of his life. He was truly free. He lived outside of society's expectations and rules and systems. And it's weird because I've talked with other people who have been homeless or currently are. And they say the same thing. They say that it's the most freeing experience they've ever felt. You know, and then later in life, they're like, yeah, now I'm tied down to a mortgage and I feel like I'm just serving, this system rather than living my life the way I could be. So that's really interesting to me. And I imagine there's probably a way to be part of society and still live for yourself, like live free. But I think it's hard because I think everything in our society is pushing us towards taking on debt, uh, you know, kind of locking yourself into a path that may not be what you want. Like when you go to university, you're told to decide your life path at 18 when your brain isn't fully developed even.
Yeah. I didn't go to college for that reason, my friend. I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I was like, I don't think they're going to be able to help me figure that out. And why do I have to spend $30,000 a year to figure out what I want to do with my life? That doesn't seem reasonable. But I think it's the world is set up. I'm not saying it was set up this way, but I think it's just the universe where the people who are disciplined with the fundamentals are the ones that usually have results that other people don't. Because it's easy to be in debt. When you turn 18, they'll send you a card and they'll tell you, like, yeah, you got a $5,000 limit. Do whatever you want. Nobody teaches you that when you get to the end of the 5,000, that minimum payment's going to be pretty high and they're going to keep taking it every month. Whether you have it or not, they're going to find a way to get it. And if you pay the minimum, you're in debt for it's going to take you 15 years to pay it off. It takes discipline to not do the thing that is easiest for humans, right? It's not set up. People have to teach you the discipline. Sometimes the discipline doesn't happen because the awareness isn't there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I remember my credit limit, right out of high school was $3,000. And today I'm 28 years old and it's still $3,000, right? And every time the bank sends me a letter or calls me up and they're like, oh, we can increase it to 6,000, we can increase it to 10,000. I'm like, no, thanks. I'm good. I don't need it. Right. And I think I've developed a healthy suspicion of anytime a financial institution offers me something, I'm like, okay, where am I going to lose out? If I accept this and I'm not careful about the terms and conditions. And
That's good. A healthy suspicion. I like that. That's good.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I didn't go to college either. And it was mainly because I didn't like high school. But also then I realized, why wouldn't I rather get paid and learn on the job? And that's what I did. And it was much better.
Same. Again, for a lot of my life, I was like, I made a giant mistake because I'm not making almost any money and I can't get any. I'm struggling to find good jobs. But eventually that paid off. Again, whether you're watching or listening, you do what you choose. But that was my journey for sure.
Yeah, and every boss I interviewed with actually respected that I didn't go to university. Like they appreciated that because they also started to see rising costs, increasing student debt. Like so many parents I know today will not advise their kids to go to university. It just doesn't seem worth the price. And Jordan Peterson, he recently started the Peterson Academy, which is aiming to be like, 1/100th the cost of a traditional tuition while providing way more value, much higher quality lectures and speakers and so on. So I think there'll be more and more innovation in the education space.
I agree. Yeah, I mean, I would say it's fairly antiquated at this point, right? There's got to be some sort of change or overhaul.
Absolutely. So going back to beliefs, I think one of the most useful beliefs for me that changed, because I went into business being told it was a dog-eat-dog world. It's either you or someone else, so you better win at their expense and so on. So I learned it was a win-lose situation, a zero-sum game. But then as I started reading books and educating myself, I actually learned, no, wealth creation is positive sum. And when a transaction voluntarily happens between two people and they're both happy about it, they would both do it again, then the whole world is enriched. The total pie of wealth has grown. And I think this is a misconception I see among a lot of young people today. They think that if you're a billionaire, you must have stolen the money from a bunch of people and that you need to give it back. But when I think about it, I'm like, well, if you're accruing an excess of capital, assuming you're doing it legally and ethically, then that means that society actually owes you more because that excess is the excess value you've delivered that people have paid you for, right? That means you've already added value to the world. If you get paid less, it actually means you're adding less value or people value it less.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point, but it's kind of like the villainization, right? If you watch TV or movies, it's always the rich people that are bad, usually in the movies, and it's just become kind of this perpetual thing where the thought is like, oh, Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk, they should never have that much money. How can anybody ever have that much money? By creating that much impact in the world. Amazon is an unbelievable business. The fact that I can order something and it comes to my house today is something unheard of. 20 years ago, that was unfathomable. And that's why he's, I don't know, is he the richest? He's one of the richest people on the planet because he has facilitated and created so much impact. But I understand it can be a hard thing, but that's a really good belief, or an understanding of a belief, is if you villainize something, you most likely will never attract it into your life and sustain the result of it. If you villainize health and fitness, you're probably not going to be somebody who aspires to be very healthy and in shape. If you villainize money and people that accrue it, it's going to be really hard for you to be in that group.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, because I've seen people who are overweight say that, gym rats, they say pejoratively, gym rats are just insecure and they're just going there to look good and so on. And people who are broke just say, well, rich people are just greedy and money is the root of all evil and so on. And I think this villainization is their defense mechanism so that they don't have to face the fact that they could change, they could get better, they could achieve these things, but they don't want to take that risk. They're kind of afraid of failing or of changing.
Yeah, and I think it goes both ways. I think there's a lot of people, like, let's just say, just so we're even on both sides, there's probably a lot of very wealthy people who villainize people who don't have a lot of money because they don't want to discuss how they made their money in the first place. Or maybe that there are some people, I would consider myself a gym rat, there are some people who are into fitness because they are insecure. And they would rather make fun of somebody else than look in the mirror and say, yeah, maybe the reason I'm so in shape is because I don't actually like the way I look. So it's on both ends. And if everybody was just more vulnerable and more honest, I just think we'd have far less conflict. Because it might be, you know what? You know why I villainize you for having all that money? Because I don't know how to get it. I feel like I've never had financial abundance, and you have it, and I don't know how to get it. And you won't teach me how to get it, and nobody will. And okay, cool, right? And it kind of becomes that open conversation. But that's I don't know. I'd like to think that's a world we can live in, but I think there's obviously a lot of change that has to happen.
I think curiosity is a superpower in that sense, because I feel like if you approach anybody who has achieved something that you haven't, and you just ask them, you just say like, hey, clearly you know something I don't. You're smarter than me in this area. Could you help me understand how you got those muscles? Can you help me understand how you built that business? Can you help me understand how you got this amazing car? And they'll probably tell you something, right? Like, yeah. Because I think when people feel like, for one thing, they're smarter than you, then they kind of feel like, okay, they can help you, right? Whereas if you go into an interaction, assuming you're the smartest person in the room, I think people can sense that. And then it radiates off this sense that they don't really, they're like, well, it's kind of a waste to share because you're not really open to it. You're not really curious.
Yeah. Well, it's hard. You got to have self-belief. You got to have self-worth. You got to have humility. It takes humility to go up to someone and ask them how they got the result. But it also takes self-belief. You have to believe in yourself enough to do it. And it takes self-worth. You trusting that if they don't respond in a positive manner, it's not going to crush your spirit. There's a lot of things that have to happen for somebody to go up and say, look, I love that car. That is my dream car. How the heck did you get that? Like, what did you do to get that? But I think it has to be not a perfect circumstance, but there's definitely an equation to get there. And I think it's challenging. It's challenging to get there, right?
Absolutely. And that's where self-improvement comes in.
100%, my friend. 100%. We always make it back to self-improvement. Always. We always get back to it.
Yeah. So what's your advice for beginners to the self-improvement arena?
If you're somebody who feels like you struggle with self-belief, don't be afraid to make your goals very, very, very small. I know one of the common bumper sticker self-improvement quotes is, if your goals don't scare you, they're not big enough. I don't agree. I think a lot of us are scared of life because there's a lot of uncertainty and life is overwhelming. So if you feel like you don't resonate with that message and you feel like you don't have a ton of self-belief, set smaller goals. I think that's a great thing to do because you're going to build self-belief, you're going to build momentum, and you're going to build self-trust. If you're somebody who has the utmost belief in yourself and you think you can accomplish anything, you need to go out into the world and lose a lot. You need to do hard things that you don't think you can do yet, because it's going to help keep you humble. It's okay to have supreme confidence. I think that's awesome. But you have to have the humility to match it. And the best way to get humility, if you're very, very confident, is to go lose. The best way to build humility if you don't believe in yourself is to continue proving yourself right in small ways. So you actually, when somebody compliments you and says, hey, you're really good at this, you can say, thank you so much. I've worked very, very diligently over the last 6 years to get to where I am. And now I actually feel like I'm capable of receiving that compliment. So yeah, first, become aware of where you're starting from. If you're somebody who lacks self-belief, your journey in self-improvement is going to be different than somebody who has the utmost belief in themselves. It's going to be a very different journey.
Yeah, I think that's really, really good advice because it's context specific. So if somebody is just starting out and they don't even know what they're capable of, then you could just set a very small goal like, okay, I'm going to make my bed every day. Start there, right? And then, okay, I'm going to make sure that I cook a meal for myself every day or whatever it might be. And so on. And then you build on that. And before you know it, suddenly you're capable of extraordinary things. But if you start off with saying, well, I'm going to do this, I'm going to attend the gym regularly every single time, I'm going to lift the heaviest weights and so on, then you're setting yourself up for failure. Where if you can set yourself up for a series of successive, small, but increasing successes, then you're suddenly like, okay, I have potential.
You make meaningful progress, and then you can see the change. And I think for a lot of us, most of us, that's inspiring. It's all we have to do is think of New Year's resolutions. Why don't most New Year's resolutions work? Because we're trying to collapse a year's worth of goals into like the first month. And it's just, that's why the failure rate is so high. You're trying to say, I'm going to lose 50 pounds in the next 3 months. Instead of saying, I'm going to go to the gym for 5 minutes tomorrow. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to try to do 25 minutes in the gym this week, however I choose to do that. And then it's 35, then it's 45, right? And then by the end of the year, as a byproduct of the new goals that you set and the new habits you've created, you lost 25 pounds. Awesome. But it's a byproduct of the growth, not collapsing time, right? But it takes time. That's the hard thing, is you want your New Year's resolutions in January, not in December of that year.
Absolutely. It's been great having you on, Kevin. So just to wrap things up for us, could you tell us about Next Level University, where people can find you and Alan, and how they can receive help from you if they deem it appropriate?
Yes. Again, I appreciate you having me. It was a wonderful conversation, all over the place, but in the same place at the same time. So I enjoyed that very much. Next Level University, our focus is holistic self-improvement, helping our audience level up their life, their love, their health, and their wealth. We are on all the podcast platforms as well as YouTube, and we do an episode every single day. So if you listen, you'll hear us talk about the website and all that stuff, and anything that resonates, awesome. But I always say, start with the podcast because it's free. The website's nextleveluniverse.com. All of our offerings are on there if that is something that interests you.
Awesome. Thanks, Kevin. Have a great day.
Thank you. You as well. I appreciate you.